So welcome everyone to our session on getting the most out of faculty and staff partnerships. We're delighted to have you here at the HILT conference in general and at this session in particular. My colleague Lisa Brem has worked very hard on organizing this. And it's great to have you here. I think we're going to do some good work today. The idea behind this session is basically to bring faculty and staff together and think about ways to work together, as the word partnership suggests, to figure out if you're someone, whether on the faculty side or the staff side, who often works with the other side of the table, how you can work more effectively. If you think you already do work effectively, just to give you a space to step back and theorize in some way why it does work well, so that on those rare occasions when you feel like a partnership has been less fulfilling, you can figure out how and how to improve that. If, on the other hand, you're someone on one or the other side of this table who is wondering, why don't faculty come visit me? I have amazing handouts. Or on the faculty side, if you're thinking, gosh, yeah, I'd love to take my students to the museum, to the library, to do something with my Canvas site, to start using clickers, any of these things, and you don't know where to go, and it's hard to figure out how to ask or whom to ask, or you're worried about, well, I don't want to ask sort of the wrong question that will in some way make this a transactional relationship rather than a transformational one, to borrow the dean of the college's favorite opposition. This session is for you, right, to think about ways in which you can work together effectively on the staff and faculty side. So we have a great crew who's sitting around me at this table here. Esme, Cheryl, Dan, Lisa. Everyone can say a little bit more maybe about themselves as they stand up to do the roundtable part of the session. But we represent, in a sense, two examples of ways in which a teaching and learning center and a faculty member or a faculty team have worked together to do an interesting project. So we're going to share, let me go forward to the agenda, a couple of quick thoughts on the panel discussion part about things that we've learned about when we work well together, how we can work better together, to give you, to sort of seed the discussion in some way to think about how you can work better. And then we'll give you an opportunity with that worksheet that's on your table to design your own partnership in a sense. One of our goals for this session, we think it's really important that both sides, again, of these partnerships, remember that the students really are the ultimate goal, right? That you should be gazing together at the students and not just gazing at each other. And also that it's really important that you have clarity around your roles, right? That you understand what you as a teaching and learning center, as a library, what have you, really offer. Because students will seek out skills and try to learn things and try to have experiences whether or not we are here, right? And so the thing is to figure out what you, as a particular center, department, have to offer them that does not in some way replace or fill a need 100%, but actually amplifies, right, things that faculty and students already want to do. On the faculty side, it's important too. Faculty do not spend a lot of time thinking about themselves as project managers unless maybe they have experience directing a center or something like that. So to really think about what they want for their students and what it would take to get that done and how to work productively with a staff member who may at least temporarily want you to be a little bit of a project manager, right? So it's to help you think about clarity in those roles and how you can really explain to the other side what you can do well and have a partnership which, again, both of you learn from, and it's not just, I have a problem, here's a handout. Right? And with that, let me turn it over to our first successful partnership. Lisa, you can introduce your co-panelists and talk about what you've learned.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lisa Brem, and I work at Harvard Law School, and I'm the manager of the Teaching, Learning, and Curriculum Solutions Group. And what we do is everything. It's completely soup to nuts. It's a small, tightly focused group that really tries to support faculty in everything they would like to do around teaching and learning, from clickers to talking through discussion boards, uses thereof in Canvas or not, all the way through more complex and difficult and long-term types of projects. So when I started thinking about this panel discussion in this session, I started thinking the first image that came to mind was the pit crew. So let's talk about the pit crew for a minute. This was the first image. We were going to have this as our image, right? And it's one possible relationship. It's one possible type of partnership where people are very focused. It's transactional. It's fast. It's efficient. Everybody has their discrete job, and the faculty is in the driver's seat, and off they go to perform what they are great at. And that is one way that we work. But then when we were talking to Adam, we talked about the caddy. So let's look at the caddy again for a second. So this is the caddy, and the caddy is standing sort of behind the golfer and with the bags. And for people, how many people know golf? Okay, this is a good, thank goodness. So I don't know golf that well, but I do know that the caddy has a lot of expertise. The caddy isn't just like the Sherpa of the golf clubs, right? They actually are able to tell the golfer, this is you want to use the 3-iron. There a 3-iron, or the 8-wood, or whatever it is, because that's going to do the best job for you in this particular goal. What is it about this relationship that's different from the pit crew is that it's more long-term, it's more bespoke, it pivots, it is a lot more unique to each situation and responsive to each situation. So like Adam was saying, instead of a packaged good, you're getting a real one-on-one relationship that takes into account the fact that every time you step in front of a classroom, it's a unique situation. So there are similarities to both types of partnerships. And one thing that I think is very important to both is trust. So you really trust that pit crew, right? You don't want that technology that you've said is going to be great to fail, because that will surely get rid of trust really fast. You want the faculty and your partners to really feel as though you have some value in this relationship, and the value that you bring is going to be really worth having this relationship. So I started thinking about the similarities and the differences, that we all share goals, whether this is transactional or a more long-term project, and that they rely on the knowledge and the skills and the experience of both parties. So when we think about the projects today, certainly the projects today that we're talking about are definitely in the caddy variety, the long-term, more complex type of projects. I like to think about, what are our goals for this project? Can we clearly articulate them from the beginning? What is the value that we bring from both sides? If you think about, what kind of value would you like to have when you're sitting in a partnership? What would you like that other person to bring to the table? And maybe even imagine something that you've never felt or seen before, some kind of skill set or knowledge that maybe you didn't even know existed out there. But maybe it would be really great to have it. So if you could imagine what that might be. And also, how can we measure the success of these projects? I think that's such an important question, and it's one that we don't ask early enough or often enough. So how would you describe success? Is it okay to iterate for success? Is it okay to fail, moving towards success? And is it okay, is there a place for pure experimentation? Does everything have to fit into the organizational goals? Does everything have to be efficient or be replicable? So where is that space for experimentation? How much of that space do we have in the daily life and the daily work that we do? So those are all the things I started to think about as we talked about how to create a session around partnerships. And I'm going to turn it over to, I'm so grateful to have Sheryl Dickey and Esme Caramello here from the Office of Clinical Programs and Pro Bono Programs. Sheryl is an attorney advisor, and Esme is the faculty director of HLab, the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, which works with students and low-income folks with access to justice issues. So, with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sheryl.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to see if I could just leave this here. Can folks see me if I just stay seated? Terrific. So my name is Sheryl Dickey. I'm an attorney advisor with the Office of Clinical and Pro Bono Programs here at Harvard Law School. And for those of you who are not from the law school, a big part of our program are clinical and pro bono programs. Our clinics are in-house clinics where there are faculty, supervisors, offices here at the law school representing clients on a wide range of matters, from housing to transactional issues to cyber law issues. And then we also have a pro bono part of our program involving student practice organizations, where we also have practicing attorneys who supervise students, but the students do it on a not-for-credit pro bono basis. Most Harvard Law School students go through one of our clinics or our student practice organizations. Typically, it's somewhere around 80%. So one of the things that's somewhat unique about Harvard Law School is our students can start practicing literally, say, 4 to 6 weeks after they arrive here. Through our student practice organizations. You can't do a clinic until you are a second year, but as a first year, you can participate on a not-for-credit basis in one of these organizations where you're actually representing clients. And of course, you always have supervision, but that's a huge leap when you first arrive here. So one of the things that's really been on our minds through the Office of Clinical and Pro Bono Programs and through the clinical faculty is what can we do to equip our students so that they have the tools to do that work effectively. And one key piece of that is making sure they understand their ethical obligations, and that as student attorneys, they have an obligation to know what the rules of professional conduct are. So the clinical faculty had developed some content to expose the students to this material, focused on confidentiality, conflicts, and competence. And the rules are many, but these are just 3 core obligations to give them a sense of what it means to be an attorney and what they have to do to comply with these rules. And to think about just the fact that they're entering this profession and now have this obligation and accountability that they didn't have, 6 weeks before before they arrived. So we had every year an online ethics tutorial, and we had a live session that focused on these 3 core concepts, and the content was good. It was focused on these 3 principles that we thought was critical to convey to the students. We had typically 3 faculty members who would volunteer to do it every year, but we would have, say, 200 plus students in a room Friday afternoon, restless, not particularly thrilled to be at a mandatory meeting, the limitations of a 200-person talk, limited interactivity. And for me, the turning point where I thought we really need to be doing something different is where one year we banned phones in the room because everybody was on their phone or on their laptops. And then a few people brought phones anyways. And so we had a conversation afterwards. Well, what do we do about those few people? And do we intervene in the room? And then I think we just stopped and looked at each other and said, what are we talking about? This isn't working. The students are on their phone for a reason. We can do better. Is there something else we could try that would be more on-demand, interactive, something that we don't know about that we know is happening elsewhere in the university, and there are people who can help us figure this out? So we had the right content, but bad format, but we knew there was a better way to do it. So we started reaching out. We reached out to the Ed School. We wrote a grant to HILT, a grant proposal, and we weren't funded, but it started a conversation. We had a valuable conversation with the HILT team, and it brought us to Lisa, and that was the start of that valuable partnership. So today I just wanted to share a couple of reflections with you on the different type of partnerships that we developed to make this tutorial work. And essentially, we had those discrete partnerships that Lisa talked about, and those were critical. But we also had ongoing working relationships and working partnerships. And I just wanted to speak briefly about those 2 types of partnerships. In terms of staff, in order to make what I didn't know when we first started out, in order to actually make this tutorial work, it involved so many different entities to produce it, to build it, to maintain it. So for example, we worked with media services to do the videos. We have worked with communications to have photographs to put in the videos. We've worked with the Harvard Training Portal to host our ethics tutorial. We've worked with IT to stream the videos that go with the tutorial. And all of those discrete partnerships have been invaluable. And even with the faculty members, we've worked with a broader team of faculty members, and we've had some who have helped us out with discrete portions. They have done a talk, say, on conflicts of interest. They prepared it, we videoed them, they reviewed it and gave us comments, and then they were out. And with all of those partnerships, both on the staff side and the faculty side, people brought expertise, a commitment to quality, and follow through, and that made that successful. But the thing I was thinking about, what Lisa was touching on, is these more substantive, ongoing working relationships that we built with the library and that we built with a team of faculty, with Professor Caramello being one of the core faculty members, to really be this ongoing working partner. And what made the partnership with the library work? A lot of different things. One is because of that unique expertise that the library brought through Lisa. There were so many things that we didn't know in terms of basic things around teaching and learning, even developing, for example, the videos. We thought we want to have different faculty members talking about different topics, and I thought we'd just videotape the faculty and include it in the tutorial. And she said, no, actually, the research doesn't. The research shows that that's not the best way to engage people. People tune out after 2 minutes. The way you engage people is you overlay photos, you overlay text, so that, yes, you see the person at the beginning, you see them at the end. But you don't just make a person watch a talking head. So there were things like that that I felt like Lisa just brought value, that ways that we didn't even know, the things that we didn't know in terms of making this better. The library gave a deep, long-term commitment to the project in terms of Lisa's time, but also in terms of just, originally it started out, I think, as a project that would last a year, and frankly, it's gone on for multiple years, which, in addition to just that commitment and time, Lisa and the library brought drive in terms of moving this forward. Professor Caramello and the faculty are focused on managing their clinics, teaching, supervising, representing clients. They cannot be the main drivers of a project from start to finish, from streaming videos to images to closed captions. That can't be their role because they already have many other hats that they're wearing. So the library brought resources. They were able to tap into some funds to allow us to do this that we didn't have before. And they brought adaptability. This project had fits and starts, and it stalled at different points, but the library adapted to those changes, adapted to our schedules, and made that work. And as far as with the faculty, and I will leave that to Esme to talk more about, but Esme in particular gave us things that we could only have from a faculty member in terms of deep subject matter expertise, not only in the law, but also the program and the messaging that we wanted to convey to students. She and the team were very flexible as our goals changed, and it wasn't easy as it butted up against her other commitments and obligations. Faculty also brought a deep level of understanding of adult student learning, and I think I was struck by a focus on tone as far as speaking to students in a collegial manner, not in a finger-wagging ethics, do this or you're going to be in trouble, but in engage, you are entering a profession, let me speak to you as a colleague, and they really brought that throughout in terms of just that understanding of how to speak to adults and how to engage adults in something along of this nature. I'll leave it to Professor Caramello to speak of some of the challenges, but one of the things, I think the biggest challenge is you don't know what you don't know. And in terms of what something like this actually takes, how much resources, people it takes to get something under the ground, what it takes in terms of schedule, and that impacted in terms of the roles in which faculty played. The last thing I want to say is the role of students, which I haven't talked about. students essentially have been one of our discrete partners in terms of they gave us feedback on the live training. This isn't working. So we took that feedback and we tried something experimental in doing this online ethics tutorial. We have an evaluation built into the tutorial. This semester we're going to be getting their feedback. And the one question I have after today's talks are, is there a way that students could play a different role, not just as discrete partners giving individual feedback on a tutorial, but maybe, for example, there are students interested in teaching and learning who could provide other kinds of feedback to us in a more ongoing, substantial basis when we know so many students here are going to go on to law teaching. And perhaps it's a missed opportunity to not engage them in a more substantive way. Professor Caramello?
Okay, well, I'm more comfortable standing, so I'll just go stand for a second. That was you hit a lot of the things that I was going to say, and I think a big piece of it is the whole you don't know what you don't know, and I think that's one of the things that interferes with the formation of more faculty-staff partnerships. So I came to this, you know, I practice at the Legal Aid Bureau. I also teach a number of classes at the law school. I teach like affordable housing law and policy, but I also teach professional responsibility, which is what we call legal ethics. And I came to this as a lawyer. I was a lawyer, I was a practicing lawyer, and I came here. And so I was very aware, very humble about my ability to teach. I don't know what teaching looks like. I mean, I've been a student, but that's it. And so I came to and I know there are all these amazing resources. I mean, I am at Harvard University. There's no question that if anybody has support for teaching, it's this university. But how in the world do I use that, and how do I access that? What's even out there? And my sense of what I needed was also very diffuse. So it wasn't like I had an idea and I just needed to find the right person who could fulfill my needs with this idea that was well-formed that I had. So I think that's why I've never really worked with Lisa and others on my teaching. And what was really cool about this project is that the project came to me. So I was involved in the initial idea to do this ethics tutorial. But beyond that, the idea of putting it into an interactive tutorial, I never would have gone near that with a 10-foot pole, because that sounds like totally intimidating. What if it's a failure? Like, I don't know. It could be corny. We brought it to the dean. She's like, oh, sounds really corny to me. And so the whole guiding principle in this whole thing is like not corny. That is if it's not corny, we have succeeded. So it was really staff, including Cheryl in the Office of Clinical Programs, Lisa in the library, forming those relationships, coming up with the idea, and then coming to us as faculty members for our, and what faculty member doesn't like to be approached with you are such a brilliant teacher of legal ethics, you know so much about that. What we need is someone who really knows the subject that you really know, and can convey it beautifully. So here's a camera, and just show up and tell us about the things you know. So that's irresistible. So of course, I jumped in, and then, as did a number of other faculty members, which is also really cool. And then we're working as a team, and we all get to know each other really well, and we get to know these guys really well. But from that experience, I have taken away, I have sat in Lisa's office with this editing software where she pulls out these things and says, what if we put this overlay here, and what if this photo goes here, and I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to make you talk faster here and slower here. And so I'm aware of all these tools that I never, if Lisa said, would you mind coming to my office and I'm going to show you some editing software, I would be like, no, my 13-year-old son tries to do that every single night, and I'm like, I'm not going to look at that, that's too boring. So, but I got pulled in, and so now as I'm going through my teaching, I'm aware, I'm thinking in a different way about my own teaching. I'm thinking, what am I trying, what's the kind of education that would best convey what I'm trying to convey to the students, or best engage them in what, in what I'm trying to talk about. And so now I have exposure to a whole new set of tools and a whole new set of people also. But the goal is not just for me to know Lisa's there, for me to know Cheryl's there, but rather for me to know that the different forms of teaching are there, and try and think more creatively and convey that to my colleagues on the faculty. So one challenge, I think, because this felt so different than what I would have typically expected to be like faculty-student or faculty-staff partnership on a teaching thing, was the roles were not defined at the beginning. I think we all just were creating this thing together, and as a result, I got very stressed. And I think we all got very stressed because we're like, whose is this? Who owns it? And by the end, we sort of realized that we needed to decide who was the project manager, what was Cheryl's role, what was Lisa's role, what was my role. And once we did all of that, it felt good. And I think that allowed us each to just fully do our piece, knowing that that's what we were there for. So I think we all wish we had had that conversation at the beginning. And one of the things, once we were having that role definition conversation, and then this is the last thing I want to say, I remember Lisa saying, all right, it's okay if this does not work. Like that had not occurred to me. It's okay if this is bad and does not work, because we are experimenting with something like totally new and different and cool. And if we learn it doesn't work, then we have learned something and it goes in the trash and no one ever wastes 4 years on it again. And if it does work, that's great. So I do think not just as a member of the faculty, not just thinking like I have this problem, this teaching problem, and I want to solve it, so I need to find the right staff member who can help me solve that, but rather to think of myself as a resource and also to think about these partnerships as opportunities for experimentation to create different kinds of teaching and learning. So thank you guys so much for that.
No, you're such a great teacher. And now we know that Lisa has 4 years to spend on any of your projects. So I volunteer her for that. But it will work. So our second partnership involves me and Dan Smail as the Frank B. Baird Jr. Professor of History and the chair of the History Department. You'd much rather hear from him than from me, so I'm just going to say 1 minute of things quickly about how the Bach Center works with faculty. Like any corny motivational speaker, I have 2 triads I want to run by you. The first one is the 3 ways that we work with faculty. The kind of most traditional way that we've done since 1975, since our founding, is kind of the one-on-one consultation, right? A faculty member or any instructor, or graduate student for that matter, comes in with some sort of question, with a syllabus they haven't tried before, they're new to Harvard, they wonder what Harvard students are like. They just need to talk to someone for an hour or for 6 hours. We're happy to do that. Our door is always open, and a lot of longer-term projects are born out of those one-off consultations, so we do that often. The second way is a lot more intense. It's through our learning lab. So this is a group of, well, it's a roving swarm of people at the center of the Bach Center that has about 5 permanent staff, at any time 40 to 70 undergraduate fellows, and about 10 to 12 graduate fellows at any time. Basically, it's a design and build studio. So an instructor comes in and says, I have a goal like teaching ethics or something like this. We take a deep dive into thinking about lots of different ways that you could do that. We actually design 3 or 4 prototypes of assignments, and we give them to the 40 to 70 undergraduate student testers, and we give them a couple of readings so they kind of simulate being in the class, and they give us great feedback. And not just kind of basic feedback as, well, this took me a long time, or this was hard, but they work with us to iterate that assignment, right? So the first 8 students end up doing the same version. We figure out it takes too long, or there's an opportunity we're actually missing. We want to add another piece to the assignment. Students 9 through 14, do that second version of the assignment. So it's a really great way of working to give students in the real class something that's already been tested in advance, which we probably do too rarely in higher ed. And then we have a very strong commitment. We don't foist on instructors anything that we don't support live, right? So if students need a hackathon to learn how to do a little bit of video editing to complete the assignment, to learn where to hold their iPhone to do that podcast assignment, we will run that hackathon after hours of pizza if we need to, whatever it takes. And then we have a commitment to assessing, evaluating how that thing worked at the end, whether it worked, whether it was a failure, what it would need for the next go-around. The third way we work with faculty, and this is a newer thing for us, is to take that learning lab on the road, in a sense, and to start doing some residencies, you might call them, with programs or departments. We've been doing this a little bit more with Gen Ed, and also with the history department, to show up at a departmental teaching retreat, for example, with a little bit of research on how that department looks and works, especially from the student perspective, to try to work with a kind of critical mass of faculty within that department to help them think not just about making their own course good or 3 courses good, but to think about how that department can start to speak a language that is kind of in internal alignment, right, to students about what they'll learn. So that's my first triad. My second one is the 3 languages we speak at the Bach Center. One is evidence-based pedagogy, right? What do studies of student learning, psych studies, cognitive psych studies tell us about how students learn well. This really works for faculty coming from quantitative disciplines who want to see a graph, right? And we believe firmly in that and speak that language. The other way, though, some faculty come from disciplines that think that psychology is just another discipline in William James Hall, and that their own discipline has really deeply sedimented knowledge about how knowledge is structured, about how students move from being a novice to an expert. So for them, we speak the language of disciplinary expertise, right? Here's a sociologist. These are the 3 or 4 things that are probably really important to that person, that they are really kind of characteristic of that discipline. How can we get them to make those things more transparent to students by talking with us? And the third language we speak is the language of analogy, right? Faculty comes in, says, my group activities aren't working very well. Rather than reinvent the wheel, we can actually look at places in the real world outside of Harvard where groups work effectively, right? Where it's crucial that bridge stand because the engineers worked well together. And so we try to bring that into the classroom as well. Anyway, that's the less interesting part. The more interesting part is what a real-life faculty member thinks of all this.
Well, thank you, Adam, and thanks to everyone for coming. It's wonderful to see you all here. I wanted to follow very much in the line of what Esme said, and just give you a sense of what it's been like from my perspective to have a chance to work with people like Adam and his team members at the Bach Center. And I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to begin with a couple of stories of things that I've used in the classroom. I graduated in 1994 and moved out into teaching, and like most people, I was thrown out there with very little support at all. There's one of the stories I used to tell in my medieval history class. The learning objective was to get students to try to understand the power of the horse people of the Asian steppes. And so I told them a story about what a wonderful thing a horse was, because when you're traveling, and it's not only a mode of transport, but you can milk the mares to get milk, you can take blood out from the horse in an emergency, and use it as nourishment. You can store them in the sacks of stomachs for a long, long period of time. And you can press the meat that you might have between the saddle and the horse flesh, and it kind of gets impregnated with the sweat of the horse. And it's a beautiful, tasty treat that lasts a long, long time. The other story I would tell them was a totally apocryphal story about a famous Viking was called the Children's Man. And the reason he got this reputation is that, unlike the other Vikings, he did not like to play in the game where when you're pillaging a settlement, you'd find a baby and throw it up in the air and see if you could catch it on the point of your spear. Now, before I go any further with this, do any of you have any experiences of revulsion to these stories?
Not yet.
Now, I don't do this anymore. I haven't used these stories for at least 12 years. For reasons that I'll explain in just a moment. When I first began teaching, I taught by trial and error, which meant I tried a lot and I made a lot of errors. But one of the things I figured out over a few years is, so this is something Gary King said about emotional experience. Students learn really well when something happens inside their bodies, when they have an embodied experience. And I figured that out. And I use these deliberately to disgust people because it worked. It got their attention, they snapped into focus, and then I would move on to other things. And I would drop one of these things in every 10 or 15 minutes. So that was something that was really, I found really interesting. Now, this brings me to the point of the first set of remarks, is that there is an enormous body of pedagogical research out there that already knew or has soon learned what I figured out on my own. And one of the great revelations of having a chance to actually get, touch this experience is that this is not just K-12 research, which is what I thought it was back in the 1990s. This is stuff that works on my students. And this has been a real revelation for me. So things like this, I actually learned about this embodied education. It's something that I worked out for myself. I wouldn't have had to go through all the the trial and error to figure this out if I had been able to work with someone who is an expert in that field. And then the second point I wanted to make is that students change. The reason I don't use these stories anymore is the trigger warning phenomenon. This is too much for students. I now do different things to get them to move and experience in some ways. Various forms of active and interactive learning, for example, are the kinds of things I use now. And I'm relying on experts who know these kinds of things because there's so many opportunities out there to learn that I just want to pick up. So let me fast forward to the other brief set of remarks I wanted to make, which really has to do with collaborative teaching. And when I do research now, all of my research in some form or another is collaborative. I do it laterally. I work with peers and colleagues in fields that I don't know, and I rely on them and their knowledge to help me get to do what I want to do. I also do generational kinds of learning. I work with my former graduate students. I work with my graduate students. I work with my undergraduates. And we are all researching together, not just because they're working for me, but because they can bring expertise to the table that I don't have. And it vastly improves all the things that we can do as a research group. This applies directly to teaching. And this, for me, has been one of the great revelations, is that I don't have to teach all by myself. For me, this happened in 2012 when I first began teaching a really active learning-based type of course. This is in the context of what soon became, with Ann Blair, the Digital Teaching Fellow program, for which we got fantastic Hilt support. And one of the things I discovered is that I can use my students, the graduate students that I'm working with, to help me figure out how to teach better. And in particular, how to bring things like, as Cheryl mentioned, phones in classrooms. How can I teach a class where the computer is not banned, but is an integral part of the way in which the students are doing it? And we did a lot. We worked on a lot of things. Again, a lot of trial and error. But we had, we learned a number of amazing things about things that work well in classrooms. This is exactly the kinds of things that we are now building up in the history department, working very closely. Adam mentioned the teaching retreat we had earlier, but working with the Bach Center to try to build up all these resources is particularly important as everyone is going to be shifting to the 75-minute teaching, where no student wants to sit there for 75 minutes and listen to a lecture. So what do we put in the middle of the classes? There's lots and lots of faculty in the history department who want to know the answer to that question. I'm sure that's true elsewhere. And then there's finally just a coda. I was thinking about your caddies and the pit crew. I really love the idea of partnerships. I don't know if any of you have seen the research or the comments that have been made about the growth of credits in movies. Have any of you ever watched to the end of The Lord of the Rings, the third one? It goes on and on. You eventually get the whole crew of people who have been fans. Gandalf the Grey figures in there if you're willing to wait 20 minutes for it. But also the growth of acknowledgments in books. We now realize that authorship is a community project, and we can't do it, in the case of teaching, without our partners.
We have about 20 minutes left in the session, and we want to give you the chance to talk more to the faculty and elaborate on these, ask questions, and so on. But we also want you to have a chance to do this activity that we've set out. So if you look on your table, everyone should have hopefully enough copies of this large worksheet. You can fold it in half, take it with you if you'd like. Basically, you can see there's a faculty side and a staff side. And the idea is to use this worksheet as a kind of brainstorming opportunity to think about whether you are on the faculty side or the staff side of this chart. The worksheet kind of prompts you to answer a bunch of questions.
Thank you so much for that, right?
It prompts you through a bunch of questions to think through, again, not what kind of products and services can you offer, or what kinds of things concretely do you necessarily need, but what kinds of experiments would you like to conduct? What are the things that maybe you offer? Say the library offers study space, but that's not unique to the library. But there are some things that the library offers that are unique to the library, right? And how you might talk about and think about internally what you want to get out of those things that you offer, or as a faculty member that you seek, how long you'd like to do them, right? If you'd like to enter into one of these partnerships, are you committing yourself for the next 50 years, right, to supporting this kind of student learning, or is it something that you're hoping to build once and then will be self-sustaining? So we thought we'd give you about 12 minutes or something to start filling out your side of the worksheet, or if you're adventurous, both sides of the worksheet. We hope that tables have some mixing of faculty and staff. You can talk with each other, and then we'll share out with the group what we've discovered, some great answers that came out of here so that you can think about your roles with some clarity in what you have to offer each other. And if our faculty volunteers don't mind, we can circulate through the room, sort of like people at a wedding, and drop it on your tables and ask you how the filet mignon is and things, and chat with you as you work. All right.
Okay, I think we're going to start to wrap up and think about, like, do you have, as you're having your conversations, I think one of the things I would like to see is, do you have any questions for the faculty here, the staff here, about what we were talking about? Any observations about filling out the form, or just thinking about filling out the form? Yes.
I just wanted to share some of the learnings from us as it prompted a conversation about our role vis-a-vis students. Do we have access? Do we work through faculty? And then because some of us teach in exec ed or part-time learners, the access questions that you asked are very different for our different learners in different programs and at different levels.
So I actually posed a question that I've been thinking a lot on, which is maybe not, it's a little off the slide over here. And it's the relationship between staff and faculty in learning from each other. And faculty are not staff, staff are not faculty, and we're often tracked in terms of our development and our productivity and our goals that we achieve for the university in very different ways and for very specific and important reasons. But at some point, there will be an overlap between, I could do my job so much better if I had a relationship or had access to a faculty member, some other part of the university, that I could then take that information and help a faculty member at the university. So it's this circular motion of how are we helping faculty develop new skills that they can learn from staff to make their teaching better, but how is staff using and being helped along the path to gain insight and knowledge from incredible, incredible faculty to help them do their jobs better, to help incredible, incredible faculty. And so it's that kind of, where are the projects that are successful and how is that being used for staff performance development and staff learning goals, so that as a staff member, I'm incredibly lucky to work at a university that cares about so many things, but I'm also developing as a person as well. And so how do we make successful relationships for projects that work for faculty? And then how do we keep those in step with a staff member's personal professional development? And so those are the kind of questions that I have. How do we build that in, and how do managers and faculty think about that, or HRs think about that?
So you're saying that giving staff more access to faculty in other parts of the university as part of a professional development. I mean, in one way, this conference is a really good example of that. And one of the few, we were talking about the few examples where staff and faculty actually get together in sort of a non-work way. Right. I think that is really important. Do you guys have any comments about any of that, or access to faculty, or?
Well, I thought your comments were fantastic. I think all I would add from a faculty point of view is that one of the things I really value about staff is that the staff are often, as important nodes in a network, are some of the major conduits for the flow of information laterally, and therefore we rely on them, which I think also means that we like that position to grow and build and connect in some, and from my point of view, I recognize that should happen. It's rewarding if it does happen in that way. It really has to do with something I know Peter's been concerned about for a long time, which is how do we get news to travel? It doesn't necessarily want to travel easily.
I don't tell people about sweaty horse meat, but I talk about zombies, because I say, we feed on the brains of faculty. I trick every faculty member into giving me a grad seminar on whatever their course is before I figure out how to help them. This is a great way to do it.
Over the years, I've benefited enormously from ATG, from Bill's help for many years, from the Center for Geographic Analysis, and so on. But that was sort of things that I could use in a class. But when it came to transforming the class, as we moved from a lecture class to a blended learning to a flipped model, we didn't have any guidance, particularly, or help. We just thought we knew how to do it. And it was, as I was saying in the earlier panel, it was a pretty bad experience. The students walked, they were unhappy, and so on. My question for you, Lisa, and for people, and Adam is, well, if one really undertakes a major experiment and trying to transform a major educational experience, how long does it take? And how do we sustain? I understand that we can sustain staff commitment to some extent, to a great extent. How do we sustain faculty commitment?
Well, for this particular project, the Ethics 101 for student attorneys is what it's called. It is an hour-long click-through tutorial, online tutorial, and it's not a small thing. And it took a lot of really deep thought to think about how to transform the in-person to the online and to do it in the right way. For me, I think there were a lot of stops and starts, and I just felt like this was the best option for the goals that they had stated, and I was really going to keep going until we got there, because I just felt we needed some kind of artifact on which to decide whether this truly is better than the in-person or better than some other kinds of model. We couldn't ever really tell until we got the artifact. So I just kept pushing until we got there, and we're very, very close. We're like a week away. As far as how to maintain faculty interest, I'm gonna
Well, I do think that it's what Cheryl was saying about the drive, a lot of the drive coming from Lisa and from Cheryl is very true, that I kept feeling like I was being pulled in, and I just had a sense of like I've made this commitment and I've come this far. But I'm so glad. So now looking back on it, I would not worry about it taking so long. But I also feel like part of the resistance is we have to, as faculty, like I see other kinds of innovations we're making, like including around implicit bias in the classroom and other things. And there's just like a really steep hill to climb to persuade faculty that the teaching methods they're using are not the best ones out there, or that the specific thing that you're proposing that's going to take a long time for them to learn and implement successfully and may be a failure, may not be the right thing, to persuade them that that's worth trying and that it's better, that specific thing is better than the specific thing they're doing. Because I can recognize that what I'm doing might not be 100% the best thing, but how do I know that what you're proposing is even better? So am I going to read all the literature? And so there's just, it's partly sustaining the interest, but it's partly just the initial inertia. So I assume that what you're doing already is getting people who have taken the plunge and sending them on the road to say, I loved this, and here's how my classroom works better. And I think Harvard Magazine and other places have done a great job of like spotlighting, shining the spotlight on specific teaching innovations, including flipped classroom, and like having boosters. And then you're, you get a little bored teaching the same thing the same way over time, right? And so having these opportunities to be led down a different path and not just have to walk down it on your own is, I think, a great thing about being here.
I am keenly aware that we are the only thing standing between you and lunch. And that is a terrible position in which to be. I'll enjoy the power for 1 second. All right. Now I think it's time for lunch. Let me just thank my fellow panelists. And of course, thanks to Hilt for this magnificent conference, and thanks to all of you for coming. So enjoy the lunch.